Welcome back to our course on PowerPoint 2013. This is the second section on pictures in PowerPoint 2013. In the previous section we inserted a couple of items from the clip art library on office.com, and in this section we're going to look at different ways of formatting and presenting those pictures. Now, the first thing to note is that if you click on a picture and select it, first of all you'll see the selection handles that tell you that that picture is selected, and at that point you get an additional tab on the ribbon. So Picture Tools, and you have a Format tab. Click on the Format tab and you have a number of options available, both in terms of making changes to that picture and in terms of how it's formatted and presented. So let's start with the size of the picture. There's a group at the right hand edge of the ribbon on the Format tab called Size. When it comes to resizing a picture, there are basically two options. One way of doing it is to do it visually by dragging on those sizing handles. The other way is to use a couple of controls in that size group. Let's do it visually first. You may well realize that if you pull the picture, say, by this sizing handle in the middle on the left, you'll actually distort it. You'll change the aspect ratio of the picture and distort it. Of course, in some situations that may be what you're happy to do, but that's not what I want to do here, so I'm going to undo that change. On the other hand, if I pull the picture using one of the sizing handles in a corner, then I maintain the aspect ratio of the picture. So in this case, if I say pulled it that way, then I would maintain that aspect ratio. Now, if you look at those controls in the size group, one says 4.13 inches, that's the height. One says 5.17 inches, that's the width. Watch what happens when I release the picture. They are reset to that new size that I've set, the shape height and the shape width. And I could, of course, have used those to do the resizing anyway. So if I knew exactly what size I wanted, then I could use those. Note that they maintain the aspect ratio. I'll come back to that point in just a moment. So they're basically the two ways of resizing that picture. When I've resized, I can reposition it if necessary, again either visually or using a control that we'll come back to. Let's do it visually first. Hover over the picture, click with the mouse, and then I can just move it around to put it visually into the position I want. You may just see there a little vertical dashed line appearing, which is an alignment facility that again we'll come back to a little bit later on. So I'm going to just release that picture there. And of course, if you're a touchscreen user, that works pretty much the same way. If I tap on the picture, I get sizing handles, differently shaped, but basically sizing handles. And then I can either tap and hold one of the sizing handles to resize the picture, or indeed I can just tap and hold within the picture and pull it around on the slide. And those guides that we're going to talk about later on, those guidelines that we're going to talk about later on, will help me to position the picture visually as well. The other important option to do with the size of the picture is the ability to crop the picture, which basically means to remove part of it, either from one of the sides, the top or the bottom. And there's an option within the size group which is crop. If I click on the crop button, what happens is I get a differently shaped set of markers. Now these appear as black markers just inside the edge of the picture, and on the corners they are these sorts of right angle shaped markers. On the sides they're straight lines. If I pull the middle top marker down, for example, I will just crop from the top of the picture. So let me just pull that down, you'll see what happens. And the dark area is the area that would be cropped, the area that would be cut from the picture if I cropped now. Similarly, if I did the same at the bottom, wanted to remove a bit of the River Thames, hover, pull, I could crop that. Now, as you can see in this example, that is one way of completely changing the aspect ratio of the picture without actually distorting it. I haven't changed the aspect ratio from the point of view of distorting the picture there, but I have changed the aspect ratio of the overall resulting picture, because when I click crop, I'll actually finish up with what is more of a widescreen sort of image, which I could then manually, or using the controls that we looked at just now, extend out to be a bigger size. I've cropped the picture, but I haven't distorted it. Now, as we'll see, for many of the things that we can do to photographs, clip art and so on, there is a particular pane that contains most of the controls that you're going to want to be able to use. In the size group here in the bottom right, there's a little dialog box launcher. If I click on that, it brings up the Format Picture pane, and that actually contains the tools and others that we've used so far. So for instance, here we open it at the size options. Now with the size options, we've got controls there where we can change the height and the width, either type in a height and width or use the little tumbler controls. But notice also just below them there is a lock aspect ratio option that's currently checked, and all the time that's checked we're going to lock the aspect ratio when we're working on the size of this picture. We can also look at things like how the height and width have been scaled, and we can look at the original height and so on, and we can reset to the original height, width, etc. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of power in that Format Picture pane, and we're going to come back to that from time to time. Oh, and there's something to point out here that I think is quite useful to know about. If you consider this Format Picture pane, for example, that pane is actually movable. If it would suit you to put that somewhere else and possibly make the image you're working on a little bit bigger, if you click with the mouse and you can drag it and hover it over some other part of the working area. In this case, that makes the image you're working on much bigger. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to see what you're doing. And then when you've finished with that, you can just grab it again, pull it back, pull it over to the right, and then it basically snaps back into position. Now let me look at some of the other options on the Format tab, and let's start in the Adjust group. There are a number of adjustments you can make to a photographic image. There are actually many of them. Let's take corrections as an example. Click on the drop down and we have some sharpen and soften options and some brightness and contrast options. Now these are all live previews, so let me hover over sharpen and soften first and look at the impact on that image. You can see that at the soften end it becomes more blurred, and then at the sharpen end it becomes much sharper. The default setting, the one we're starting with, is right in the middle. Similarly below that we have brightness and contrast. The starting point is the middle one, brightness with a 0% change, contrast with a 0% change, and then by moving to the left we can reduce brightness, moving to the right we increase brightness, and then contrast we adjust by moving up and down the list. So you've basically got a gallery to choose from. If you want finer control than that, then you won't be surprised to discover that if you click on Picture Corrections Options, it brings up the Format Picture pane again with a different page selected. These icon tabs here give you the different pages of the Format Picture options. Open at the one we've got, Picture Corrections, and then it lets you choose Sharpen, Soften presets, Brightness, Contrast presets, and then to set the relevant control, Sharpness, Brightness, Contrast, on a slider scale. So you can get a very fine level of control over adjustments to your pictures using that approach. So let me just close the Format Picture pane one more time. Now what I want to look at is a couple of these other groups. Picture styles, again, that's a very useful one, because if I click on the More corner drop down button there, I can see a number of styles, and if I hover over these, live preview as usual, I can see different ways of presenting that same picture. Note that in producing those different ways, what PowerPoint 2013 is doing is applying a number of different things. It's applying different types of border, different types of picture effect, different types of picture layout. And apart from the fact that you could go over the live preview gallery here and perhaps choose the one that you like, You also have buttons here, picture border, picture effects, picture layout, each of which takes you into the format picture page for that particular aspect, and then you have a fine level of control over what you can do. So really, this set of format commands is a very powerful way of processing photographs within your PowerPoint 2013 presentation. So when you come to work on your equivalent presentation to this one, I want you to try as many of those different ways of presenting images as you can. I just want to show you one other thing in this section, and for that I'm going to go back to the first slide in the presentation, and I'm going to look at the background of that slide again. So if I right click on that slide, as you may recall, one of the options is Format Background, and up comes a Format Background pane, and this time instead of putting in solid fill or gradient fill, I'm going to use a picture fill. Now watch what happens with picture fill. Don't be put off by that texture there, because what I'm going to say here is insert picture from, and then I'm going to insert picture from online. I'm going to go back and find that same picture again that we've already used. And I've inserted it, and it is now the background on that initial slide. Now although it's a background, it's pretty much dominating the slide. You can barely see the title. But what I want to do is to change the transparency of that picture. If you look a little bit further down here, you can see that entry there, transparency 0%. Let me try a transparency of 50%. And you can see what happens. I finish up with a sort of slightly misty masked, semi-transparent background image with a picture of the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben on. Let's try 80%. Now what you can see is a much more faint background, and if I made that 90%, that may be a very good background for every one of the slides in my presentation. Now of course, because I've applied it to a specific slide, it's only going to appear on that first slide, but I could apply it to a layout master or indeed to the overall presentation master if I wanted that consistently as a background. I'm going to leave that in place at the moment for this one. You may want to experiment with something like that on your presentations. So that's it on this section. In the next section I'd like to look at photos a little bit more, and very specifically we're going to look at creating photo albums in PowerPoint 2013. So please join me for that.